you take your bracelet off, and with your hatchet, just chop a chunk off, throw it in the scale, and then they would weigh it out and give you a value based on what that is. And obviously, depending upon your weight.
So the money rings would be for your wrist rather than on your fingers.
Oh yes, yeah. I'm not sure why they call them money rings. They're for your wrist, but yeah, they're all little bracelets. A simple, unadorned, unstamped, just a nice squared profile. With money rings, there are a few different profiles. Something like this is a very classic rendition of it. It's was originally found in the scale hoard, and it had a stamp pattern, basically like this guy. I'm not sure if you can. It's a triple. It's a triangle with 3 little dots in it, and something like that on this style ring was found in the scale hoard. More complex and heavier ones, stuff like this guy here, this is actually a forged octagon as opposed to a square. This was a lot of these were found in the Spillings hoard. Most hoards had some type of currency jewelry. This is an example of something from the Curdale hoard. Actually, this guy's roughly 4 ounces, so it would have been a very wealthy person who would have something like this. But I have a variety of different.
Screen.
Just trying to orientate the camera. Sorry, there you go. A variety of different pieces. Something with a twist in the center. That's more of just a little bit of a recreationist piece. There is a gold version of this from a different hoard, but I haven't found one in silver with a twist like that. Most of them found are square profile, but there are a lot of found, especially in the Spillings hoard, which has got hundreds of them. A lot of them are octagonal, which is fun to forge. And so what I did is I usually typically the first thing I like to do is I have a square ingot already forged out, rough square. I measure it so I know where I'm going as far as so I can keep my tapers even and clean. So I just find my middle. I typically mark every 1/2 inch just so I know, like I said, so I know where I'm working. And then I do one side at a time usually. And here's something I worked on a little bit yesterday showing the one side for the taper. I took a 2-inch piece and turned it into 7 inches, tapered down to about just below a 1/16 of an inch. That side is done. The other side needs to be forged out for a full bracelet. So when I prepped, I literally, there's just little scribe marks on the surface of the silver. You can catch them glinting there. I literally just forge up to 1. I slowly work them back. So over time, it creates the nice tapered effect. I may have here and there because I have a lot of rebound on this stump I just got as far as sound. Second, I'm going to show I basically repeat that process all the way up the center, and you can see that the end has gotten slightly tapered. With every pass, it'll get a little more gradual, a little more gradual. Typically, I get these to about 6 or 7 inches if I'm making something for stock. 6 or 7 inches before I actually wrap them on my cheating cuff bracelet mandrel. So I can wrap evenly, so every time they come out nicely, because trying to bend across the axis of a square, especially when you're working with some of the heavier stuff, is not simple to do. But I'm gonna work on one of these bronze ones. I might be able to pull a bronze one out pretty quickly. If anybody has any questions, feel free to just let me know while I'm going. How loud is that ping coming across on the microphone?
Not bad at all.
Okay, that was what.
It's loud. It's louder in your shop, pal, than it's coming across.
Okay, because it's super loud in here.
Oh, I'm sure.
Okay. So I may actually, I'll work on trying to finish this one out really quick for us. Not really quick, but. And as I go, I rotate the piece so I can
share this, but
evenly draw each portion of the metal.
review? No. It's Baron Fergus. That's Baron Fergus.
Yes.
Oh. Main feed one.
I should have switched to a little bit of a heavier hammer to do my initial drawing to get a little bit more movement, a little quicker. And as I'm striking, I'm drawing my hammer back across to help pull the metal. When I'm using the heavier hammer, what I'll do usually is I'll do a couple cycles with a heavier hammer, then I'll switch to the lighter hammer to correct my profile. It's easier to do with the light hammer because you can get much cleaner strikes.
How frequently do you anneal?
I anneal until I can notice the metal stop moving. It kind of changes color.
Mm-hmm.
And I prefer to anneal more than I necessarily need to than to take a chance on causing a fracture.
Gotcha.
Especially if I'm keeping the edges really crisp, sometimes the edges will like to get little tiny hairline fractures.
Mm-hmm.
And then once you get those, you've got to do a lot of extra work to not have them just break right off.
Right. This weekend was my first weekend really diving into silver. So that's why I was asking. I noticed when you anneal it, it looks dirty. And then when it can't be worked anymore, it's shiny.
Yeah, if you look kind of in the middle right here, it's a little dull.
Yep.
And then this surface starts to get shiny.
Yep.
It gets kind of like a dull gray versus like a dull silver color. You can feel how it changes too. That's the hard thing to explain. You can feel it getting harder under your strikes. I gained a little bit on that, not too much, but I'm gonna go and I'm gonna anneal this really quick. I'm gonna mute it just because the torch is loud. I couldn't hear you over the torch, sorry. Now, you know, you gotta quench it and I dry it off so I don't get anything on the face of my anvil. And then I rescribe my lines every time. I gained about a 1/4 inch on that last pass. When you're working with the thicker portion, your gains will be slower, but they're still there. As it gets thinner, like the taper on this side, you can really get it to move quickly. It also anneals faster, so you can put more actual hammer time on it quicker.
What are you scribing on? I missed that portion.
I'm actually just scribing little. If you look right on the metal, you see them.
Yep.
They're just really light scribes with just a sharpened piece of metal.
Okay. And what are you doing that? What is the purpose of that for?
What I'm doing that for is so I can no spacing. So I'm tapering. I'll taper the first piece.
Gotcha.
Then I'll taper. It lets me see how the taper is happening.
Okay.
So I make sure I'm tapering from my center line every time. So I'm not screwing up one side or making one side too long. It helps me keep the tapers uniform.
No, it's brilliant.
Because especially like this little 2-inch piece turned into a 7-inch piece. So I want to be able to make this 2-inch piece into a 7-inch piece, the same.
Right.
And every pass, I like to check the profile to make sure it's square. If it starts to turn into a diamond, you have to do there's a little bit extra work you have to do to correct it. Let me forcibly make a diamond on this one. So when it starts to turn into a diamond, what you need to do, it's really hard to see the profile, how it's getting a little off. You have to actually round it. So you're gonna hammer the edge onto your anvil of your high side. So what that'll do is that'll cause your diamond portion to go from a point, and it'll compress back to being square. So essentially it just compresses it and you're reshaping it. But if you let it stay a diamond too long, it can be very difficult to remedy late game. And I like to, what was that?
Sorry, I just forgot to mute.
Oh, no problem. And as I'm going, I like to pull the metal with it at the same time. Just so I evenly work the piece of metal. Every once in a while, if you see something, you can correct these with gentle taps. I go back through and just give it some gentle taps. Like this is actually starting to get a little bit of a diamond, so on the next pass, I'll correct that as well. If you get it really bad, you actually almost basically round it off back to a circle and then completely put your facets back in from scratch. It's not a big deal, but it's just, again, if you can keep up on it throughout your whole piece, it cuts down on your workload at the end.
Right. What was the original weight of the silver that you started with?
Give me a second, I can tell you, because I made 2 pieces.
Yep.
And they're identical. I think it's around an ounce and a half to 2 ounces, somewhere in there. But if you give me a second, I'll tell you.
Thank you.
39 grams, so like an ounce and a quarter-ish.
Yep, awesome.
Typically, when you're weighing silver, it's done in grams because an ounce isn't the same if you're going ounces to troy ounces. They're both different. So grams is easier. You don't have to worry about a conversion. So I'm just going to anneal this piece again. I'll be right back. Something I was going to mention, I like to work it, it's cooled off some. Just after it turns cherry red is where I like it. As far as for forging. Depending upon your alloy, it is a little different. I'm actually using a alloy that I made based on the Curdale Hoard. It's about 96.2% pure. That's based on one of the Scottish Antiquities did a big XFR study, and they had metallurgical breakdowns of all the alloys on I think like 30 or 40 different items they found in the Curdale Hoard. So I picked one of them and started working off the alloy, and the alloys actually worked pretty nicely. Little pain in the butt to make as far as just because you have to do a little mixing, but they move nicely. Not quite as hard as sterling, but it's softer and it work hardens nicely, just like sterling, but it's not quite as hard. Personally, hate working with sterling. It's almost as bad as working in bronze, in my opinion. Can do it, but it's prefer not to. I've got my square profile back, so I'll just keep that and try and maintain it. But I'm sure I'll have to correct it as I'm going again. So, but it's not a big deal. It's just something, as long as you keep up on it, it makes your life easier in the end. What I may do is try and exaggerate the diamond so I can show you, like, actually trying to correct an exaggerated diamond can be a little more difficult. And the diamond will cause, as you get thinner, the diamond happens easier. So you, as it gets thinner, you have to really just cut down on the impact you use on your hammer. It doesn't take much, sorry, it doesn't take much to move the actual metal once it gets thinner. Now I think you actually might be able to really see, I just forced the diamond. You may be able to see it now. I'm not sure if how well you can see the diamond as opposed to it being square.
You can see the diamond really well.
But I'm gonna, I'll show you how you can correct that diamond. You can really see it if you're looking at it like top down. You can see your ridges. And on the diamond, one side will be, if you notice how much wider it is. I mean, how much wider? It's only about a couple millimeters different in width, but when it's in your hand, you can really see from the pointy side of the diamond to the other side of the diamond, it really changes the thickness. But on this next couple of passes, I'll correct that. So I'm just going to anneal it again really quickly. So the worst thing just happened to me when it's cold and you drop your you drop the piece you're working into your quenching bucket and you have to fish it out. So you get to dip your arm in your quenching bucket.
Could you talk a little bit about what's annealing?
Sure. With silver especially, as you work the piece of metal, it gets harder to the point where if you work it any more, it'll start to form cracks and little fissures, and obviously it'll just fall apart. What you do is annealing is you heat it up till this particular alloy likes just after cherry red, and then you dip it into water. It's kind of the reverse thing of when you see people make knives and swords and blades. You quench in oil hot and you work it hot, whereas with silver you typically work it cold. So now this piece has just come out. It looks kind of dull, but it's ready to work again. And when you finish a piece, you actually work harden it. So once it's in its shape, I use two different things. I use a rawhide hammer to work harden. And I also have a period style antler hammer for work hardening as well. a really lightweight little antler hammer with a polished face works nice because the antler is softer than the metal, so it doesn't actually mar your metal.
Is that any type of antler as far as like deer or moose or anything to that effect?
This is whitetail, and it seems
Okay.
to work pretty well. I haven't messed around with any kind of moose or elk or anything because getting a piece, I don't
It's
know anybody that wants to
expensive.
give
Yeah.
up the horn,
Yeah,
and
no,
buying it's extremely expensive.
yeah. I was just wondering because I know what they say with dogs, you get larger dogs, they're supposed to use the moose antlers, I guess maybe because it's a splintering thing versus maybe a
And
hardness
it's
thing then.
much harder. Moose
Okay.
antler is it's just a much denser product. If you're
Okay.
doing like the draw plates and stuff, it works better on the harder antler, obviously, so it doesn't wear out. I've made a few with whitetail, and it works for a couple pulls, and then the hole starts to break down just because the metal's harder than the material.
Okay.
And then working out the triangle, you have to determine, or the diamond, you have to determine which face is your tall side, and then essentially you're just gonna round it off. So now you almost create a little octagon, and you just compress it back to where it's square again. The only thing that does, it leaves unnecessary faceting. So what you have to do once you get it back to square-ish, you have to correct all your edges over the next few annealing cycles, which isn't a big deal. It's just if the bigger the diamond gets, the harder it becomes. You could also, I've done it on a few pieces, intentionally create the diamond because it gives you a slightly larger working surface on one face of the piece of jewelry. For example, this piece, I made it like a diamond intentionally to give it a much higher, taller profile, so I could use a little bit larger of a stamp. Piece was definitely done as a diamond, because if you look from the side, you can see how tall it is this way, and then as I turn it, it loses maybe 2 or 3 millimeters as far as the overall height. So it's not a true square. This particular piece was made to give myself a little more working area. And that can come into play heavily when you're working in the octagons. Some faces of your octagon, you can make them different sizes. And depending upon your stamp work, that makes a huge difference. If you're trying to get a larger stamp on one face to create a particular type of pattern, you can do that by altering the size of the facets. So depending upon what your end goal is, you can do a lot just by altering the shape of your piece. Now that I have that rounded off, I'm going to go back in and remark my center line and work and draw it just like I was trying to draw it before, as far as to pull it out the overall length. So far, I've gained a little over 1 inch total in 3 passes. Yeah, 3 passes. For my annealing torch, which I typically use propane, is a very basic, just a torch head from, I got this at Tractor Supply, and this hose adapter at Tractor Supply for about 30, 35 bucks. Then you can actually hook it right to a grill container as opposed to buying the little $4 disposable ones. You get one of these and you're getting about for the same cost. There's a place here that fills it for 13 bucks. You get essentially 20 disposable containers and the cost is about a tenth. And then for when I'm melting or working with fat pieces, I use MAP gas. That was a little more expensive. The head was about 80 bucks, but it came with the hose, so I can actually work a little easier, so I don't have to hold the can. Because when you're melting large portions of metal, when you have to hold the torch for a few minutes, it doesn't seem like a lot, but it adds up as far as time.
Question for you. How hard are you striking that silver? Because, I mean, I know when I bladesmith and I'm moving iron, I'm using a 3-pound sludge and I'm hitting it with what I've got, you know?
Oh, no. I'm using one of the auto body hammers. I think they're like 11-ounce head. They're not much.
I have the same hammer and I'm trying to hit it with like a feather touch.
When you're working with a thicker piece, a feather touch is fine. You're not going to get as much deformation, so you can really control and do finite adjustment with it.
Okay.
If you're trying to move metal, I have a ball peen I use.
Yep.
I think it's an 18 or a 20-ounce ball peen. So it moves larger metal, but it doesn't give you as nice shaping because these are nice and round and polished faces.
Right. I've got them. I polished them, but I guess my fear is cracking the silver and then just having to melt and start over again.
With something like square stock, well, not square stock, but when you're working like a money ring,
Mm-hmm.
as long as you're not hitting it too hard, I mean, I'm hitting it, but I'm not killing it. Like if you saw when I was making the coins before, I was using a 16-pound sludge with force, and you really don't need a ton of force. Like I'm kneeling,
Right.
so I'm only using my wrist right now.
No, and that was why I wanted to ask, because it looked like you're hitting it, but you're not really hitting it.
Yeah, it's all I'm just kind of just rocking it right now.
Yep.
I mean, if I wasn't trying to record, I'd be standing up and I get a little more hit amp strength
Right.
out of it, but you don't need it.
Thank you.
A little more than a feather, but you don't need much more. And I may anneal more than you need to, but like you were just saying, I would prefer to anneal more often than ruin pieces. So if I anneal 2 times more than I need to, as long as you're not heating it up to where you're melting it and causing increasing the grain structure in the silver, it's not an issue. If you heat it up too high, you do have to do some special things to it. It's kind of, you can almost ruin it if it gets too hot. You might have to actually just melt it down and start over, because if you increase the grain structure too much, it'll like to just break right off. Kind of like if you're working with bronze, you know, it has that funny temperature where it'll just fall apart. Silver doesn't do that, but it can start to get more brittle once you get the larger grain structure. And if you overwork it once it's at that point, it will break. Where you'll really notice it is when you go to form it and shape it. If you have a messed up grain structure, I've had a couple that just, as I'm pushing them around the form, they just crack. So typically I like to anneal a bunch of times doing when I'm wrapping them. Not necessarily needed, but I prefer it than breaking a piece, especially if you put a lot of effort into it.
Is there anything you can do to salvage a piece once it's broken like that?
You can fuse it back together, but you're going to, especially if you have stamp work on there, it's never going to be as structurally strong and you're going to ruin your pattern. I mean, if you solder a piece, the only thing is if you break it when you're like bending it, it's not going to be in its final position. if it's in its final position, you could solder it, but it's not going to be as strong. And over time, you could see just wearing issues with it. I mean, solder is very strong, but typically, if it cracks and it's not in its final form, you're kind of starting over.
Burnt toast.
Yeah. And I know I tend to, when I break something, it gets an extra hit on the hammer, whether it needs it or not. And then it gets thrown back in the pot to get melted over. Especially if you've got a few hours into, especially on some of the more intricate stamp work patterns. I had one bracelet. It's about 3 hours worth of stamping to get done clean and even. And if I screwed it up, I would be, if it's unfixable, it would have been scrapped. And unfortunately, there's no coming back for it. I mean, like that pattern is what I'm talking about right there. There's so much stamp work on that. I mean, you can't see the entire detail. I'll post some pictures on the page, but there's a ton of detail on that piece. That if I mess that up, it's just starting over because you can't really fix it. And when you, like before when you're talking, Fergus, if you when you got it small, if you hit it too hard, you will easily can create that diamond effect and have to start correcting your diamond again when it gets really fine. It just takes really gentle, literally just little tiny, precise, gentle strikes to keep the shape. The one thing I like to do is once I have it to everything to the right size, I will go back in with it unannealed. When it's kind of hard, I will give it very gentle corrections. Like on a flat surface, if I see where my hammer hit at a slight angle, I'll go back in when it's not hard to the point of cracking, but I would have already annealed it. I'll go back in and clean up all my edge work to make sure everything is nice and sharp and clean. And then you anneal it, and then you wrap it, or you put it on your bracelet form, or stamp it. But I like to, when everything is a little harder, because it won't change as much, but it'll let you get all your lines in super crisp. Time to anneal again. You can see it's kind of getting really shiny again. Something I forgot to mention that I like to do with quenching, I like to use a 5-gallon bucket, especially on longer items, so you can completely immerse it in one shot, so you don't have to worry about flipping it over.
I'm a little confused with the annealing. I work with Araboy in the glass shop, and from my understanding, I thought annealing was heating it up and cooling it down very slowly at a controlled pace. So I'm a little.
That's for working with, I believe, ferrous materials like irons, steels. Non-ferrous, I might be backwards on that. Non-ferrous.
This was glass, so soft
Oh,
glass.
glass. No, glass annealing is totally different. Glass has
Okay,
to be
so it's
cooled
the same term,
extremely
just a
slow.
different. I was just like, okay, maybe I'm just confused, but okay, I
Yeah,
didn't
no,
realize
no,
there was different types. Okay,
yeah, when you're annealing glass, yeah, you definitely want to cool it extremely slowly because
yeah,
it will crack.
yeah. No, I understood that. I was just when you kept saying quench it and stuff and annealing, I'm like, no, he said that 3 times now the same way. I must be confused. So okay,
It's the same process, just at a different rate.
okay.
I'll see if I can set up so you can. It's hard to hold the torch and the camera
No,
at the same time.
yeah, I get it. I mean, I understand what you're doing. I didn't realize there was different types of annealing with different materials. So
Yeah, and yeah,
that's why I was confused. Gotcha.
and like with glass, you're annealing with air, just climate controlled air, whereas this you just dip it in cold water.
Okay.
Then steel, you want to use oil or what have you.
Yeah, that I knew,
Rollers.
and this and that, but I didn't realize it was a whole different thing. So
Well, in any way, annealing is at root is controlling the rate at which it cools, whether
Okay.
you're intentionally cooling it fast,
Exactly.
intentionally cooling it slowly. The idea is to control the rate at which it cools in order to make it as strong as you can.
then how's that different than the tempering then, just for knowledge sake? Because I'm kind of new to all this. So
You can't temper silver.
okay.
Well, you can work hard in it.
Okay.
What?
So tempering is basically hardening something, where annealing is controlling the rate of cooling it down. And okay, I'll have to look it up so I can I don't want to get you off topic and confuse the crap out of everybody.
With tempering, especially like with a blade, tempering is essentially I would have to double check it. I believe you're realigning the molecular grain structure to
Okay.
a stronger, less brittle state.
Okay.
Correct. So when I take the blade out of the forge and I go into a quench, as soon as it comes out of the quench, I make sure that there's no cracks, no tinks. It's straight. It gets wiped off and it goes right into my wife's oven, and it goes to 400 degrees for 90 minutes so that it's tempered and hardened, and we come out and we file check it to make sure that it's hard. And so my file skates off of it and I can hold an edge.
Interesting. I'll have to talk to you more on a separate time then at that.
Would love to.
Okay.
I do a lot of copper, and you can heat it up and just let it cool, or you can quench it. Either way.
Yep.
But you work hard in it, just like the silver. Like-
Copper's nice.
Yeah.
Once you anneal copper, it's like working butter.
Yeah.
It's so beautiful to work. I'm going to work on some copper bowls. It's just so lovely to work. So I'm just going to go back and anneal it again. So, I mean, it's a slow process with a hammer if you're careful. Like I said, I anneal more than I need to, but I prefer not to screw up my piece. I like to re-straighten it every time before I anneal too. Like you see, it's picking up a pronounced bow. I like to go back in and get it nice and straight.
So just to remind everybody, we have about 10 minutes left in this presentation. However, if Sigvardr wants to go late, that's fine. We do stay live until 6 o'clock. So we do ask that you stay around for a couple minutes for some closing remarks from our co-hosts. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I heard someone talking. Was that a question for me? The torch is just loud.
No, it was just the host letting her know how much time we have left. And
Oh yeah,
and
that's a good
this and that.
question.
Just
We had 10
we've got
minutes.
about 10 minutes.
Oh geez.
If you need more time, that's fine. Just let us know. We do run until 6 tonight.
Yeah, no, I mean I can trying to think of something. If I have something I can wrap quick just to show that portion of it. I mean, because this piece probably needs another 10 to 15 cycles of heating and hammer work. But I mean, you can see that it has definitely gained in size, but it needs a lot more. Let me cheat on a piece real quick. I can cheat a piece of bronze up real quick. I don't do it for my silver work, but I do have a rolling mill. So I can cheat a piece that I can show you the wrapping process on. Okay, so there. Now I got a piece. Let me just anneal it really quickly, and then I will set my bracelet former up. Okay, so I have the piece of bronze set. So I just put, this part of my shop is not exactly clean, sorry. I put it in the form. So what you do is you find your center point. I usually use it like I measure it out with a tape measure. And then I have a piece of, especially when I'm working on the squares, just a piece of leather. What that allows it to do, it allows the square, the sharp portion, to bite into the leather and not skate around, so I can get a nice even shaping. So it doesn't move, because sometimes when you're shaping it, it can roll and do funny things. Then I just use the rawhide mallet to wrap it around. I mean, this piece is a little wonky because I was rushing it, but essentially, then you have a nice, this should have gone on the smaller form. And the rawhide hammer, you can really abuse the metal, and then it just slides over and around. Unfortunately, it's too small for my wrist, but essentially, that's a finished piece there.
Did you make that form yourself?
I did not. I purchased it.
Because that thing is amazing.
Yeah, it was like $40. Not super expensive, but not super cheap either. Before I had that form, I was for bigger wrists. You know where's really fantastic? An empty can.
Yep. So I'm using those. I've got the horn off of the anvils that I use and wrap leather around for different sizes. But boy, that'd be great. And then I've taken a couple branches from outside in the yard, cut them down.
Yep.
Throw them into a vise.
Spray paint cans work pretty good too.
Yeah, the bracelet mandrel is readily available from any jewelry equipment supply place.
Thank you very much.
So how do you hold?
What was that?
How do you hold that to stamp it?
How I would hold it to stamp it, I would set it right on my anvil here. Let me grab a stamp quick. So you stamp it before you actually wrap it. Otherwise, you're going to want to shoot yourself. It's just so miserable to try and stamp on curved surfaces. I prefer a heavier hammer. I don't know where it is. It's in my shed somewhere. I have a 2-pound sledge, mini sledge, that I really like for stamping because it doesn't bounce off of the strike. So you get a really clean hit every time. This is just a really simple, little tiny, it's about an 1/8 inch. It's a triangle. You can't see it, but it's a triangle with 3 dots and it's about an 1/8 inch size overall. And I just hold the metal just like that. When I'm doing a run of stamping, I'll actually measure them all out. So everything is relatively uniform. And then it's just a, and that's a nice tight little design right there. It's hard to see it. I'll post a picture of this on the page once we're done. And depending upon your pattern, you like that simple pattern there is literally every stamped edge is touching itself. But if you're doing an alternating pattern, the negative space between is almost as important as the actual individual strike. And that's when your measuring comes in really importantly to get even stamping when you're doing elaborate patterns. I'm just eyeballing this right now, but and then one thing you can do, especially if you're working with a triangle, is to mark your bottom. So you're having the same piece of your stamp down every time. What I did with mine, I painted, the bottom of mine is painted black, whereas the sides are filed shiny. So every time the black is facing me. Just so you get, because your stamp obviously is not, well, I say obviously, but if it's not perfect, you want the same imperfections the same direction every time. Unless you don't. I mean, it really depends on what kind of pattern you're looking to do. Like I said, I'll post a bunch of pictures of some different patterns. Like this has got a really tight, intricate pattern across the middle. And then it has a much larger open pattern here. And a lot of the design actually is the negative space of the stamp work. You have any other questions that I could hopefully help you with? Help anybody with?
Thank you. That was a wonderful presentation.
It's my first one, so I'm learning the process as far as teaching it. It's one of those things. It's